If you think Joe Rogan matters, if you think The View matters, then gaming matters too. Like it or not, this is where your kids are spending time. This is where the culture is. And one of the biggest problems with the Democratic Party is we've got to be a hell of a lot more confident about going into these spaces.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. My guest today is Brianna Wu, who's an activist, a prolific commentator on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. And she's the executive director of Rebellion PAC. But I asked Brianna to join me today to talk about a domain in this information war we're now engaged in, whether we admit it to ourselves or not. That's a domain I don't understand at all. And I suspect most of our audience doesn't either. And that's the gaming space. Before we get into it, Brianna, give us a short version of your backstory and your hard-won expertise in this area.
Well, I think most people know me from the Gamergate incident of about a decade ago. Just to remind you, in case you didn't see the Law and Order episode, which is terrible, 10 years ago, a bunch of the alt-right started their careers by targeting women in the game industry, including me. They sent us rape threats, death threats, tried to run us out. The idea was feminists were taking over your video games. And believe it or not, this is where Steve Bannon, Milo Yiannopoulos, Candace Owens, Lauren Southern, Anita Sarkeesian, Zoe Quinn, like all these figures today, which are huge that you hear about in the news all the time. All of us came from Gamergate a decade ago. So kind of weird. It set the precedent for how we argue online today, which is destroy everyone in sight.
Have feminists taken over gaming?
No, we failed miserably. We did not do a good job.
I think you tweeted out recently that the stakes are getting female representation in the industry from like 3% to 8%. That's what they're fighting over.
That was my famous tweet about it. It's so wild. Like, if you look at the wider tech industry, women engineers are like 20% in many cases. In the game industry, the last study I saw, it was 3%. This is terrible. Same skills, same programs, same everything. It's just one is so sexist you can't work there and the other's different. So, admittedly, to give the other side of it, a lot of the things that we tried in those years have really, I think we need to look at them with fresh eyes. There was a culture in the game industry in those days of kind of the feminists telling the men to shut up. And there was very much a culture of that. And don't get me wrong, I think women do not get a fair structural shake in the game industry and many other spaces. But I think this is relevant to our party, where we are hemorrhaging white men and men overall. And I think it's time to revisit, are we going to bring more people into the Democratic Party with a positive message that says we stand for everyone? Or are we going to hyper focus on micro identities? And I think clearly the former is the way to go.
Brianna, why should we care about what's happening in this niche community? I mean, do conversations in the gaming world matter to our larger political discourse? Isn't it just really a tiny subset of the conversation happening across America?
Well, let me flip it around. Do you think Joe Rogan matters for our culture?
I do. I mean, intentionally provocative because so many of the ideas that end up transforming discourse on the right begin on gaming chat rooms,
100%.
right? They begin.
This is my point. Yeah. If you think Joe Rogan matters, if you think The View matters, then gaming matters too. Like it or not, this is where your kids are spending time, particularly if they're young men, especially if they're on the autism spectrum. This is where the culture is. And, one of the biggest problems with the Democratic Party is we're very comfortable going on CNN and the New York Times. It's a format that benefits us. Normal people aren't there nowadays, and we've got to be a hell of a lot more confident about going into these spaces, in my view.
Can you talk about the reach of some of the most prominent gamers? Because I think for most people, their image of an influencer is a movie star, right? And you look at their numbers in terms of like Instagram followers or TikTok followers. Give us the side by side. What do some of these gamers command in terms of attention in this attention economy?
Hey, it's huge, and it's a different kind of attention. So if you're talking Gen Z, they don't know who Jennifer Aniston is, but they sure can tell you who Pokimane and Ninja and Hassan are. The truth is, these people are setting culture. In my view, not to get too spicy, but I think some of them are saying some really anti-American, virulently sexist stuff. You've got some of the biggest streamers in the world that are literally rooting for America's enemies, China, the Houthis. You've got them broadcasting terrorist propaganda. This is fairly terrifying stuff. So I think it's a space that we need to take a lot more seriously than we are.
Should we be comforted by the fact that much of this rhetoric is performative, that it's sort of in the vein of the gamer culture to be provocative, and a lot of time they don't really mean it when they're rooting for the Houthis, right? They just want to get a rise out of people.
No, I don't think it's a joke at all. I think we're kind of dancing around the fact we're talking about Hassan Piker here. It's not a joke what he stands for, or Dems, or any of these other people. They think our own country is the enemy, and they're talking to a lot of young people. I think this is a fairly terrifying message. It is also true, unfortunately, that a prerequisite for being successful in the space is how edgy you're willing to be. So it's really interesting, Ken, because I spent so much time this last cycle trying to get Democrats to go on in these spaces, and they'll look at it. And they'll look at what Hassan and Destiny and all these people have said. Vosh, who had a child pornography scandal last year, and they'll look at it and they'll be like, why the hell should I go on this space? This is not exactly brand safe. But the truth is, if we don't engage in some way, we're not even talking to these people. Trump has no issue about going into any of these people's faces. Neither do the right wing. So, we've got to try something new, and respectability isn't winning us.
What is that conversation with a congressional communications director like? Give me the example of a bad one and then a good one. What model should we be following? I mean, AOC had an incredibly successful appearance recently that no one else has modeled. Why aren't we learning?
Well, people respond to authenticity, right? People don't come to my Twitter, and I've got fairly popular Twitter, right? They don't come there because I'm an expert on particular policy matters. They come there because I'll tell you what I really think, and it's kind of entertaining when I screw it up sometimes. So, people are out there for authenticity. So when you're talking to, I would give Ro Khanna as an example of someone that really, really understands new media. He's excellent at this. He's willing to go out there and take chances. He will flat out say, we've got to go to where the voters are. I understand they're doing some stuff. Just because I have a conversation does not mean I am embracing all these things they've said. I don't betray conversations in back channel, but I've certainly had the opposite conversation where I've tried to connect them to somebody and they've been like, wait, they just said what about this girl? No, of course we can't be associated with that. And I get it. I understand that it's better for that particular congressperson's brand safety, but it's not good for the party overall.
Isn't that consideration of brand safety really an indictment of how the Democratic Party operates, especially in primaries? I mean, if we're getting really tactical, they are afraid of a certain very active wing of the party that's going to punish that kind of transgression. Not necessarily what they say, but who they're associated with just in terms of being a guest and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. They're more focused on their career and what's good for them rather than what's good for the party overall. I think this speaks to a bigger problem that Democrats have, which is, I don't want to make it sound like I don't love my party, because I do. And I think in this moment, please don't misunderstand me. I am Team Democrat. But I've spent so much time in meetings where people are like, let's just say this and we'll word this in this way, and we can get trans women in sports, but also not piss off trans moms with concerns about this. we're so unwilling to take a stand or really have an honest discussion that I think a lot of people have concluded that we're full of shit. And I think until we're willing to have some messy, interesting conversations, I just don't know where the party is going to go. Take Seth Moulton. I'm a trans woman. He made some really spicy comments about trans women in sports. And it's like I was so thankful for someone that would just go out in front and say, like, flat out, I am uncomfortable with my daughter playing sports with trans girls. Like, I'm not saying there's not a counter argument to that, but he was saying what he really thought. And what did the party do? They just lined up and shot him. So I think we've really got to come back to being willing to have conversations that are real. I think that's part of how we get the American people to trust us again.
Can you talk about the very real threats that transgender people are facing, both in the form of policy and the discriminatory effects of these bans on, for example, transgender people serving in the military, to actual physical threats because of the change in the environment, the permission structures for violence against trans people? For someone like me, it's largely academic, except for the people I care about. And that's what I want people to really feel. Like, this is a life and death matter for trans people when you're looking at an administration literally trying to erase them from society.
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking that, Ken. Thank you. It's like I made a choice 4 months ago to come out publicly, but before this, I could just go through life and it never came up, right? From my point of view, I had a private healthcare issue. I dealt with it and life needed to move on. I got married to a man. I got a job. I just never talked about it again. I didn't want something that was painful that I went through to become the centerpiece of my life. The Trump executive order is destroying people's privacy on this and saying every time I go to a movie, every time I go get alcohol, every time I board a plane or interact with the federal government, like, think about how many times a day you show your ID. You have to disclose private medical information that opens you up to a ton of discrimination. I think that's extremely wrong. Can
you humanize that for us?
Sure.
You're a trans person doing something that you could have done completely anonymously a month ago.
100%.
What's the experience like now? Let's say you're 21, you're of legal age, you want to go buy a beer.
Right.
What's it like?
So, for me, I've Massachusetts ID, so it doesn't come up unless people recognize me. But, what I would say is for many people, it would be a situation where, let's say, you're checking into a hotel and they might do a double take. I'm going to Mississippi for a few weeks, and imagine if everywhere I went, I'm trying to announce to the world I'm male, right? That's just, you have to be so selective in how you disclose this to people, because it's not everyone's business. People do, when they know you're trans, treat you differently, and that has huge effects on the opportunities you get. No one had misgendered me in decades until I came out, and it started happening. It is just so bizarre. It hurts you, it invalidates you. You're literally just trying to go through your life.
Hey everyone, it's Ken. I've got another amazing writing retreat to share with you. The last one in Archeron, France is full, but another has opened up and it sounds just as incredible. It's in the Italian countryside, not far from Rome, and it's hosted by two award-winning writing coaches, Athena Dixon and Anne-Marie Kelly. Just imagine writing in a place like this. Telling stories is what makes us human, and we all have those stories in our pockets about love and loss, joy and grief. Let Anne-Marie and Athena help you lay your stories on the page. You'll gather each morning in an historic Italian village to focus on craft and storytelling. And afternoons will be spent with local artisans passionate about sharing their culture and traditions. This once-in-a-lifetime retreat is for women of all ages and experiences who long to build community, search for answers, and dismantle the roadblocks that stand in your way. Athena and Anne-Marie practice writing as a form of healing, and don't we all need that right now? If you want to write beautiful prose in a beautiful place, join Athena and Anne-Marie at Strada Toscana, No more excuses. This world-class coaching team will help you put your stories on paper in an amazing setting. Join them in Italy this fall. Click the link in the show notes to learn more. Thanks. What can allies do to help? What can a straight white dude with an American flag behind him do?
Well, I think reach out to your trans friends, ask if they're okay. I do think, and I understand this is a little controversial, I think we need to focus on actual transsexuals again. I think respectfully, I will call someone, non-binary, whatever pronouns they want to be called. I believe you're going through something real. But the truth is, if I don't get estrogen, I will just shut down. I can't do my job. I will lose my mind, and it would be really hard for me to continue with life. There's an asymmetrical risk factor here. So what I need the Democratic Party to do is to really educate itself on these issues. I need us to lean away from the extremism, and I need us to double down on the healthcare message. And I think that people that are medically transitioning deserve dignity, and it's really important to stand with us in this moment.
And how about fighting back against the Trump administration and the attempts to literally erase trans people from public life?
So, Ken, this is where I'd love to know actually your opinion on this, because I keep thinking to how we treated this in the first go around. It seemed like our entire mission was to just attack Trump all day long with all the volume that we could. And it seems like he's back and stronger than ever. So I personally really struggle with this. What I consider my top mission is I think we've got to make the Democratic Party something that will win in the midterms. That is my number one priority. So rebuilding trust with the minority communities that didn't vote for us this time, putting together a credible plan, and really building a culture that makes everyone feel welcome. That seems like the top mission to me, but maybe you feel differently.
I am not sure where I land on this. I wanted to talk to you today because of your perspective and your life experience, which I find incredibly valuable. It's an area that I need to learn so much more about. But I feel like we've lost on so many fronts that I thought we would win on. I was one of those cheerleaders after the DNC who said, we're on a roll. And I was so wrong about that. And there are days, probably most days now, when I default to my sort of innate values-driven programming, which is, if in doubt, make the decision that you think you'll be judged on 20 years from now or 50 years from now, which doesn't really factor in the politics of the moment or the strategy of which protest you amplify and which you don't. It leads me to want to fight on all fronts and stand up for people everywhere, even if it hurts our brand.
Yeah.
And that's my inclination in this moment, even if it's bad politics.
I really understand that. I really respect that too. Maybe it's I'm just so tactical. I think being a trans woman, you have to get so used to stuff that doesn't feel fair. You're just numb to it after a while. I lost my entire family transitioning. So it's asking me to deal with something that's unpleasant. I just literally, it doesn't compute for me. But this is the way, structurally, let's look at this like an engineer. Structurally, what are the reasons you think we lost this election? Inflation would be the big one, right? We would agree with that.
Can I pose a very sort of subversive hypothesis here?
Please.
And this is a new thing for me. But in all of the calls I've been on, and I've been on quite a few with you where we're talking about the right democratic messaging and how do we craft the wording just right, I'm coming around to the opinion that we're overthinking it. And that when you look at the counties that voted for Trump and what they believed, so much of their motivation was based on disinformation, on lies. And if you look at the counties that went for Trump by more than 30 points, they believed in the opposite of what's actually happening in terms of the economy, crime, and immigration.
Yeah.
So
you think it's the information ecosystem?
I think it's an information battle more than an indictment of our character as a country. Yeah. Now, maybe I have to believe that because my identity is so wrapped up in the country I fought for. But I am operating under the hypothesis that if the people we need to reach actually knew the truth about what Biden did with the Inflation Reduction Act and the investments in infrastructure, if they knew the truth about what Trump said about the Constitution and about service members being suckers and losers, that we would win every election, that this is an information battle, not a character battle.
So let's walk through your hypothesis and then we'll walk through mine. So let's say, okay, for the sake of the argument and for the record, I fully agree with you. The right is dominating us in every one of these spaces, right? Online, the left does not have a Daily Wire equivalent, right? We don't have a Joe Rogan. We don't have a Twitter. We just don't. So, let's just for the sake of this.
We used to have a Joe Rogan. It was Joe Rogan.
Yeah, exactly.
He was a Bernie guy.
Fair enough. But just for the sake of this, what could we possibly do between now and 2026 to fix the information ecosystem? Because that feels like what we call in engineering a boil the ocean strategy, which would be very difficult.
That's not a hypothetical. You want me to answer?
How do we fix it?
Well, we are trying. I'll put the ad right in the middle of this episode. We are hoping to build Valor Media Network with ex-Navy SEALs and Delta guys and sports commentators.
Oh, hell yeah.
Whose values I appreciate and I understand, and they're vetted. But it's folks like Dan Barkov, who released one of the most viral ads from a vet tearing apart Trump's inauthentic patriotism, was a Navy SEAL and teammate, went to become an emergency room doc, and is now doing a show on sports and culture and service so that we can infiltrate the manosphere, right? And grab audience there and siphon them off and bring them back to a space that is not toxic, that is affirming.
This is a good idea. This is a really good idea. Yeah.
I don't know if we can do it in 2 years, but I think we can do it in 4. If you looked at how quickly the Daily Wire grew with some investment, we need to create alternatives.
Yeah. So 100% with you on that. Man, one of the reasons I like what you're saying is the Democratic Party has really hemorrhaged male voters, right? And look, I'm a feminist. I've been married for 17 years. I like men, right? So, I think this is something the Democratic Party culture needs to change. I think we can talk about women's issues without being so demeaning to men and pushing them away. I think most men, like if I've learned anything about guys in my life, it's like guys like quests. They really like quests. So if you're making them like, hey, you can just do this one thing and you'll be awesome for women, I think they'd really find that appealing. So let's try talking to them.
That's the idea. I think the real tragedy in what happened with youngish men, 18 to 44 in the last cycle, was that the majority of them, and we've got the numbers on this, the majority of them believe in marriage equality and common sense gun reform and climate action, and yet they still broke for Trump. Why? Because we didn't talk to them. Why? Because Joe Rogan had 80 million people listen to his Trump interview, and we, feeling really good about ourselves about it, didn't even go on that show. We avoided those spaces as a point of pride.
Yeah.
And looking back, gosh, what a self-inflicted wound that was.
It was a really big mistake. So I like your plan because it ties into what I think is wrong with the party. And I think, maybe, Ken, I feel like you're the one person I've talked to that can understand this because you're a Navy guy. One of the things I really remember about growing up in Mississippi with Camp Shelby right there, Dad growing up in the Navy, being in Navy bases, is there was such a culture of you're only as strong as the weakest link among us. And that was just baked into so many of the things I saw. And I think that if we're really serious about fixing the Democratic Party, I think we've really got to get away from these ideas of elevating every single person's identity. I don't think about myself as a trans woman first. I think of myself as an American first and someone who wants to do a good thing. Like I don't need who I am to be elevated in every conversation. I just want to be on the team. And I think the Democratic Party has got to, there are ways to talk about structural sexism and racism in ways that say, hey, we're all in this together, that give a positive vision for the country. I think what those younger voters particularly are seeing are all these messages of people that just seem untethered from reality. And I think it's really souring our brand. So I think if Democrats really are the party for working people, we've got to start understanding working people don't talk like they have a PhD in gender studies. We got to cut some people a break at some point.
Well, we got to leave it there, Brianna, but I'll be honest, this has been one of my favorite conversations on the show in a long time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. I want to hear more about your Navy stuff sometime.
You got it. Thank you.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.